Hey everybody, welcome to our latest edition of the DNS Music Show. I've been looking forward to this episode for a long time. We are going to dive into two of the rarest Kiss albums, Kiss the Originals and the Originals 2. Now, what amazes me is some of my friends who happen to be huge Kiss fans have never heard of either record. So what we'll do tonight is dive in and give you a history and all sorts of trivia related to these two Kiss albums. And I'm joined by resident Kiss expert Shane Steniford by way of Boston, Massachusetts. Hey, Shane.
Hey, Darren. Good to see you. And I'm looking forward to this one as well, especially getting into the Originals too, which is super rare, the holy grail when it comes to Kiss vinyl collectibles. So yeah, we'll dive into this and talk about both the Originals 1 and the Originals 2 from Japan, and all the goodies that came with it, and a little history, leading up to how these records were released. And
Excellent. As I mentioned, among Kiss fans, I mean, obviously there's different tiers of people who collect Kiss merchandise. From your experience, are most people not aware of the Originals?
I would say the Originals is pretty well known. Among the diehards, for sure. The Originals 2 from Japan is not. Me, myself, considering the fact that I am a Kiss collector, I mean, not only a fan since 1981, and followed the band very closely in all their collectibles, but I wasn't even aware of the Originals 2 until about 10 years ago.
Okay.
And I obtained a copy about 5 years ago. But our childhood obsession with the Originals 1 that was released in the US plays an important part in the story, in terms of making, if we thought the Originals was such a big deal, finding about the Originals 2 later on in life, let alone if we had known about it as kids, how incredible that would have been.
Yeah, and you and I started following Kiss at a very interesting time in their career. It wasn't during Love Gun or Rock and Roll Over. It was during Unmasked and The Elder. But just to create some context, in 1981, if you stopped into your local record store, whether it was looking at new albums by Kiss or secondhand records, this was not an album you were going to find. The Originals, not only was it extremely rare, but frankly, it wasn't something that seemed to be advertised through their normal methods. And what I mean by that is if you look, for example, at the sleeve of Kiss Alive 2, you'll see all of the studio records up until that point, along with Kiss Alive, but there's no mention or reference to the Originals.
And they had a habit of doing that, not only with big albums like Alive 2 and that sort of thing, but any of their tour books would always show their back catalog. And this was never listed as well. And that's probably why it fell under our radar a little bit. It was in a limited edition run with the Originals, and we'll get into this in a little more detail. There was an original run of 250,000 that they printed. And then they did a second edition where I think they probably printed another 500,000 from what I heard. So yeah, finding a new copy in a store in 1981 was near impossible.
So for those who are watching, what I've done is I put up an image of the Originals, and this is actually the cover from an 8-track, but it's a fairly clean portrait of the album cover. And what you'll notice is that you see this exploding, an explosion juxtaposed with the faint image of the first Kiss studio album, Kiss. And this was released on July 21st, 1976. Interestingly enough, it actually charted all the way up to number 36 in September of 1976. Shane, tell us how many copies were printed?
250,000 for the first run. And 36 for a 3-album set, I would say, is pretty impressive. because I couldn't find out what the original retail price was. There's an ad
Mhm.
that we'll see in a little bit where it said specially priced, but I would imagine this was not, an inexpensive item by 1976 standards. And a little bit of history too. The first Kiss album came out in 1974.
Mhm.
It was Kiss, their self-titled album. And then they released a second album, Hotter Than Hell, later in 1974. And then they released their third album, Dressed to Kill, in 1975. All three of these albums did not do particularly well chart-wise. However, they were a very big concert draw during this time. And they always had trouble in terms of trying to capture their live sound and energy on vinyl, especially with the first three records. They just fell a little short sonically. They struggled. And then they released a live album in 1975 that made them household names. Alive came out. It was just a huge success, a double live record, or so they say live.
Right.
But that went multi-platinum. And then after Alive, they released Destroyer, which was another very successful studio record with a top 10 hit, Death, and all sorts of classic Kiss songs like Detroit Rock City, God of Thunder, you name it, it's on there. Most of those songs to this day are still in their current set list. So this was Casablanca's way, now that Kiss was more in the mainstream. It was a great marketing idea. Let's take these first three albums, see if we can repackage them and sell it to this new fan base, because Kiss's fan base had grown so much due to the success of Alive and Destroyer. And it was a really good move. I mean, it's pretty much sold out within a month or two. The 250,000 copies, and then the second edition, but those sold out as well. And then they moved on, because this is, at least in America at that time, they were pumping out albums. Rock and Roll Over came out just a few months after the originals, so they had a new studio album to promote, and then it's Love Gun, and then Alive 2. So they were putting out so much product during this period of time. You can see why I got lost in the shuffle in terms of by 81. It's not, like I said, you're not walking into a store and finding really anything new. All I could find new at the time was Dynasty and Alive and The Elder.
Right.
Especially where we lived. But we would find, in terms of a Kiss back catalog, everything was at used record stores.
Yeah.
Or flea markets or friends or whatnot.
Yeah, and these are all important points that we can address a little later, because I certainly remember as a young kid in the small town where we grew up, there were two record stores. There was Cactus Music on Main Street, and then further down the street there was Record Town. And Cactus Music certainly had a fairly decent selection of secondhand albums. And I remember, for example, always being able to find secondhand copies of the solo albums. To a lesser extent, Destroyer or perhaps Kiss Alive. But again, the originals was just nowhere to be found. It really became the holy grail for us anyway, in terms of a collectible, something that, we heard about. It was such a different time. There wasn't the ability to go online or research. There was no eBay, no internet. The best that you could hope for is that, somebody within your circle of friends or contacts had an older brother or sister who happened to be a Kiss fan and perhaps had a copy of the originals that you could just see.
And I know we were trying to figure out how we found out about it, and it could have been through this particular record store, Cactus, that we spoke of. In addition to selling guitars, sheet music, used records and whatnot, they also carried old used rock magazines from the 70s, like Cream and some of those type of magazines. So it could have been from an ad from there. I know you mentioned possibly your babysitter's older brother was a big Kiss fan, and maybe somehow you obtained. There was a 16-page booklet that was in the originals somehow that maybe you came across this. Back then we would cut everything up and put them in photo albums and make our own Kiss book, so to speak. So probably not the greatest idea when it comes to collectibles, looking back at it, right? But maybe I remember some little clippings that you had that came from the originals, and then maybe we came across this ad that you could show. Maybe, but it became a mission for both of us, and that's why I was really looking forward to doing this show and just talking to you about it, because I was obsessed with trying to find this. Every person that I knew, I would ask about. Every store, every flea market, thrift stores, also where we grew up, sold, used records, lawn sales, those sort of things, antique stores. We lived in upstate New York. They have, before this stuff became trendy, a lot of these like American Picker type, storage buildings and antique stores. And occasionally you would find Kiss stuff in there. Because people were just, by 1981, there was all this Kiss merchandise in the 70s, and it ended up in strange places where we were able to find it in some cases. But yeah, way before eBay, way before it was all just about the chase and the search.
Now we're looking at the ad that appeared in some rock magazines. This was from 1976, November 1976 rock magazine. And what you can see here is the album and all of the goodies that came along with that record. So Shane, I'll turn it over to you and you can discuss this image a little bit.
Yeah, so the packaging on this is pretty brilliant, kind of going along with where, Kiss from a marketing standpoint was, miles ahead of other people in the 70s. So this includes all 3 original studio albums with the covers, a 16-page booklet, a Kiss Army sticker, and then a sheet of Kiss cards. This was prior to the Kiss releasing their own trading cards a couple of years later. But this is a great find. I mean, imagine at the time, or us as Kiss fans trying to track this down in its entirety, was, like you said, the holy grail of Kiss merchandise. Because, like I said, not even this wasn't even something that was mentioned, but then seeing an ad like this and knowing that it's out there somewhere in these not only the booklet but the record itself, just the whole concept. Now we own them all individually, so it wasn't like we were getting any sort of bonus tracks or anything like that. But once again, different time, just the excitement. And I remember when you were waiting to hear word of when you were going to actually receive this copy. Did you get it yet? Did you get it yet? Did you get it yet? I'm sitting here about that. So I remember a lot of anticipation and excitement leading up to you getting that.
For somebody who does acquire a secondhand copy of the originals, how common or uncommon would it be for it to include things like the cards, the sticker? I'm assuming at this point, most of those items would be missing.
I would say it's hard to find the cards. Not impossible, but hard. I have 2 pristine copies that I picked up, of course, off of eBay. They have the booklets. They have the Kiss Army sticker. But I do not have a copy that includes the cards. And one other thing that's worth mentioning, too, obtaining an original pressing, not the second edition, is pretty hard to come by as well. Not impossible, but pretty hard to come by. Another thing that Kiss did, believe it or not, with their 8-tracks, I don't know if you have a photo of it, I can even show you too.
I just switched over.
The 8-track, and this is what's hard to come by. The 8-track actually came with a little mini booklet, stickers, and cards as well. That's almost impossible to find.
Shane, with the image that's on the screen now, are you able to discern with this particular 8-track whether it's part of the first pressing or the second, or does that not?
If this is from my house, it's from the second pressing.
I see.
I can't say for sure if they even did 8-tracks on the first pressing. I'm not sure if they did. I just know that originally it was going to be a 250,000 piece run from Casablanca, assuming that was in vinyl only. And then when it did so well, because if you look closely at the front of the 8-track, which I actually have in front of me, it is a second edition.
Yeah, and here's a picture of the two side by side. And I'm assuming in order to accommodate all 3 studio records, it required 2 8-tracks or 3?
2.
Okay.
But as we all know with 8-tracks, we're going to do an episode on 8-tracks at another time. But 8-tracks and their sequencing and everything is it's all off, and that's a whole conversation within itself. But it's 2 8-tracks.
I see. And just out of curiosity, how much did the 8-tracks cost when you purchased them secondhand?
I can't recall. I don't think it was terribly expensive because my copy, although they were intact and in good condition, they were not sealed, and they did not include any of the additional, goodies.
I see. Which it brings up, from a marketing point of view, something that KISS was just so good at, which was enticing consumers or fans with these little souvenirs that would be included with each record. And certainly the originals falls into this category where you've got the cards, you have the booklet, the sticker. These are things that are big incentives. For example, if you're thinking, well, why should I buy the first 3 studio albums again? Well, maybe it's because it's a different packaging, or there's extra merchandise that will be, potentially a collector's item in the future.
And the first 3 albums didn't come with any merchandise. I mean, this is where, Alive is where, and then the originals, this is where it kind of all started in terms of additional souvenirs.
Yeah.
I think a couple years later, we're going to be doing the solo albums, or Alive 2, or Love Gun. And Love Gun has a little gun in it, actually. The solo albums where KISS each put out their own solo album in 1978. It's like full of these great posters and individual, merchandise sheets, and the tattoos in Alive 2, and the booklet in Alive 2. So the originals is one of the first pieces to include a lot of those souvenirs that became, pretty common with every KISS record moving forward.
So in terms of scarcity, the originals, we had the original pressing in 1976 of approximately 250,000 copies, then a second pressing. Did KISS ever reissue the originals beyond that? Were there any other pressings?
Not that I'm aware of, the second pressing, but when they re-released their entire vinyl catalog, I believe it was in 2014, it wasn't included.
I see. And sonically speaking, I know you have all of the KISS albums on vinyl. There was no remastering that took place. There's nothing sonically different from the originals compared to the first, original pressing of the first 3 studio records.
No, not that I'm aware of whatsoever. The first time they did any sort of remastering and remixing that I'm aware of was for the 1978 Greatest Hits album, Double Platinum.
I see. So 1976 was a very busy year for KISS. It's amazing to think we have Destroyer, which came out in March of '76, Rock and Roll Over, which was released in November. But in July, they released the originals, and a lot of casual KISS fans have never heard of that record. So I think it's interesting that we're covering it. And again, in terms of scarcity, the rarest KISS album seems to be the originals too. So maybe we'll shift gears and talk a little bit about that compilation record, which was released on March 25th, 1978.
So it's important to note the originals too, although it's almost identical to the original one in terms of its packaging and its concept. This was only released in Japan, okay, because a similar pattern in terms of their popularity that happened in America happened in Japan. So when they kind of hit their apex in 78, this was a way to repackage the last 3 studio records leading up to Alive 2 and their big tour that they did in Japan during this time. So a little bit of a collectible for the Japanese audience. This 100% was off my radar. I never even heard of it. It's like I was saying earlier, until about maybe 10 years ago. And then I obtained a near mint copy with all of the inserts and all of the face masks and the different souvenirs we'll get into. But I have a near mint copy of that here, and I know you have some great slides from when you were out last summer. But this is right here in my hand, thick, nice, beefy, with all sorts of goodies inside.
Yeah, and another thing I wanted to mention, if we'll just switch to the cover one more time, it's similar in appearance in some ways to the originals. We have the explosion happening, although this time we have Kiss depicted more in a comic book type capacity. Interestingly enough, we have Peter Criss sticking out his tongue.
How about that? You want to know something? I've looked at this cover. It's been on a display shelf. I look at it every day, and I never noticed that. But it certainly pops a little bit more. Like if you look at the originals, you have to look really close to see the first record in there. How it's blended. But this right here, Kiss is up in the forefront here. But it also says in the fine print, the albums that touched off a rock and roll explosion, Destroy Your Love Gun, Destroy Your Rock and Roll Over, and Love Gun. So much like the American copy, the albums that touched off a rock and roll explosion, Kiss, Hotter Than Hell, and Dressed to Kill. So
in terms of the actual design, the originals too is what they call a gatefold cover, where it opens up. Is that correct? Kind of like a folder almost, where you open it up, right?
Yes.
Okay, all of the contents are placed inside.
Yes, just like the originals. Yes,
just like the originals. I'll switch to the next image, which is all of the souvenirs and goodies that came packaged with the originals too. Why don't you bring us up to speed with what we're looking at?
Yeah, well, this also has a booklet as well. But what is really hard to find, and what makes this collection so special, outside of the black and white booklet, which has lyrics both in English and Japanese, the inner sleeve, another photo color booklet that's similar to what was in Alive 2. If anyone watching has a copy of Kiss Alive 2, there's a similar booklet. But there are, for each member of Kiss, there are these 12 by 12 paper masks representing each of the 4 band members. Paper masks. So they're very delicate. And in the copy that I received, anyway, had purchased, they are in mint condition. And the photo that you had up before, like I said, was a photo from my house when you were out last year and took them out. So they are beautiful in terms of the condition, and almost Kiss, sort of like a caricaturist type of style, where it's just it's just 4 really unique pieces.
One other piece of packaging material that apparently was part of the originals too. Japanese robes are called kimonos, and a kimono is often decorated with a obi, which is like a belt, so to speak. Yes. And did yours come with the obi?
It did not. Had it come with the obi, it probably would have been worth about another $150.
Okay.
I was able to get this copy for around $350, and I'm thinking it was around 5 or 6 years ago. But copies with the obi are worth about $500.
I see.
If you can find one.
So, do you know how many copies of the Originals 2 was actually printed?
No, I couldn't find anything about it myself.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike the US, a little bit of a bigger market. You know, they can start with 250,000 when Kiss is coming off of multi-platinum albums. I mean, platinum albums or gold albums in other countries, just due to population, just completely different numbers. So I'm unclear, but certainly in Kiss circles, from a vinyl standpoint, this really is the holy grail.
Yeah, extremely scarce.
Extremely scarce. I mean, go try to find one. I mean, that's pretty hard to say about anything. I mean, you can usually find anything, but that, a couple of other pieces that I have, they're almost impossible.
And this is a slightly different conversation, and one that I don't necessarily want us to dive too far into, but did Kiss release singles in Japan that are, and how scarce are they?
Well, I got to tell you, one thing about Kiss that I'm not fluent with are Kiss singles in terms, I don't know if you mean singles as in songs or 45s.
I mean 45s.
45s. Yeah. I got to tell you, I have to get up to speed a little bit on the Kiss 45s. Kiss recently, I would say recently, I mean, it was in the last 10 years, in addition to the vinyl set that they put out where they reissued all the original albums, all of them up through, I think it was up through Monster, but didn't include Sonic Boom. Sonic Boom came out in 2009. It was only sold in Walmart, so they didn't have the rights to it. Mm-hmm. So actually a Sonic Boom vinyl is pretty hard to find as well. Maybe second to the originals too. Those are pretty hard to come by.
Wow.
But they also put out a singles reissue too. I didn't buy it. I never really got into 45s too much. I have a bunch of Kiss 45s. I believe your father had a jukebox in a bar or restaurant. And somehow we were able to, grab a lot of 45s from either him or the used record stores back home. I used to buy them, but I'm not really sure. And even in our first episode, when you, I failed to mention it, when you mentioned that we were talking about the Creatures of the Night tour and the Creatures of the Night album, how I Love It Loud was the only single from it, but the B-side for that 45 was a song called Danger. I'm like, I couldn't believe that such a great song would be a B-side on just goes to show you how great of an album Creatures of the Night is if Danger is your B-side to your single. I mean, come on, it's unbelievable. But I'm not sure. That's really something that I need to brush up on.
And in terms of, because I've thought about this a little bit, it wouldn't really make a lot of sense now that we live in a streaming world, to reissue the originals or the originals too, for a service like Spotify or Apple Music, because in essence, it's just a playlist of the, first 3 studio records or the 4th, 5th, and 6th studio album collection.
This is exactly. There's really no point. What the appeal of it is actually something tangible, having it in your hands. And this is coming from someone who love tangible items or collectibles, but has I've gone more towards really, streaming and putting a lot of my collectibles almost in storage, so to speak, where I don't see them that, I don't really go in there that much and check things out. But just in terms of a tangible piece, the Originals 1 and the Originals 2, just amazing.
It is amazing. And I think, we have this personal connection with the Originals because when we were kids, it was just, such a rarity and the holy grail of, for a Kiss collector. And, to appreciate it, you have to be in the mindset of a collector, someone who perhaps follows Star Wars or Star Trek. The Kiss collector mindset is similar to that, where you geek out on some of these albums or some of the rarities or items that are scarce.
Without a doubt. And it was our childhood obsession with the Originals that made getting this Originals 2 so exciting for me. I mean, half the reason I bought it was like, when Darren comes out to Boston someday, you'll be able to look at it and see it, and I'll be able to show you. And that's, that's really what makes this thing so special, because of how, what a big deal this Originals, finding this was for a year. And I don't know if we brought this up yet, but you had obtained a copy of it. And imagine this, it's a great story. I had been looking for this album for a couple of years, lawn sales, you tracking it down, record stores, everything that we talked about. It was a winter's day. I was at my grandmother's house, and I was out for a walk in the neighborhood, and I found a copy in a snow pile at the end of the street.
Unbelievable.
I mean, imagine this, the plow's going down, just this big snow pile. I come across a copy of the Originals just lying there. Now, mind you, it wasn't in great condition. It had been out in the snow. It didn't have the booklet. It didn't have the cards, but I had my own copy of the Originals. Now, eventually, you were kind enough, when Van Halen and Randy Rhoads became a little more important than Kiss, I was able to, kind of inherit your collection. And I have it, but I have that Originals, and as nasty and scratched up as it is, you just can't make it up that I'm out for this random bike ride or walk in the middle of the winter, a random neighborhood in a very small town in upstate New York, something I've been looking for years. I just find a copy.
Your story is a case for divine intervention.
I still can't believe it's true. I still can't even believe it.
Well, all of this reminiscing has been wonderful, and it just gives me an appreciation for our childhood and the times that we grew up in, when the thrill of going into a music store or a record shop was such a big deal. Cactus Music was a great record store in Oneonta, New York. It was on 211 Main Street. Interestingly enough, another memory that comes up is next door there was a department store called Harold's Army Navy.
Right.
And you could go in there and buy a T-shirt and pick out a decal, and they would print the decal on that T-shirt, and that's how I got my first Kiss shirt.
No kidding.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I didn't even. Now, did Cactus do the decal, or did Harold's do the decal?
Harold's did the decal. They had the emblem from the Destroyer cover. I believe they had Love Gun, and then the Kiss logo with each character inside each letter.
Wow! So it was a classic iron-on.
It was an iron-on. Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And the first, a little shout out here, the first iron-on that I ever bought from Harold's when I was a little kid, Doug Decker is the guy who assembled it. That's before he worked at the Eighth Note.
Right. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I love it. Yeah, those memories are great, and it explains why in this closet, a few feet away, that I have like 5 or 6 copies of Alive 2. Because if I went to Cactus and they had a copy and I had a poster in it, and a lot of them did. A lot of them had the posters, or not the posters for Alive 2. The solo albums had posters, but the booklet. If I had it, or if I went into a store, I know we're going to say this for another episode, but I'll give you an example. There was another department store called James Way in another part of town, and I didn't even have an 8-track player at the time. but this was a copy of Double Platinum. This is the copy I bought at Jamesway for $1. Probably I would say in 1981, 82.
Yes.
Still sealed, not worth very much. Casablanca Records was overproducing at this particular point in time, so it's not worth very much. But this is the original. I remember buying it, but it didn't matter if I didn't have an 8-track player or if I didn't have a cassette player, whatever it was. If it was Kiss,
we're going
it was in the store.
we're going to dedicate an entire episode to the 8 tracks, but you raise a really interesting point, which was around the time we became Kiss fans, there was this transition from the 8 track over to the cassette. And it was so odd. You could go into grocery stores or department stores and they just had bins of 8 tracks, and they were practically giving these away. You could buy the solo albums for 25 cents.
100%. And when we do the 8-track episode, I have so many copies of the solo albums from when I was a kid. But then, thanks to eBay and all this other stuff a few years ago, I wanted my goal was to have an entire Kiss collection of sealed 8 tracks, their entire catalog.
Wow, that's amazing.
We'll talk about that, but
with that, I think this is a good place to wrap. I hope you have enjoyed our episode addressing Kiss the Originals 1 and 2. Check them out on eBay or however you can access them. They're very rare Kiss records, and for us, incredible memories. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon.